This information is so important that I need to start reading this book right now. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The Roots of the Federal Reserve, Tracing the Nephilim from Noah to the U.S. Dollar by Dr. Laura Sanger, PhD, copyright 2020. This is Chapter 1, Section 1. As we begin our adventure together, we'll start by examining some pertinent facts about the clandestine meeting that took place at Jekyll Island on November 1910. This covert gathering of powerful men undoubtedly raises numerous questions. The answers to our investigative questions require gathering behind-the-scenes information in necessities, extensive digging into history, and thorough research through the web of time. In the process, answers to age-old questions will be revealed. There may be moments along the way when you wonder why this is necessary. In those moments, hang in there with me. I can assure you that our investigation, as we most mysteries take place in turn that you cannot anticipate, our quest for understanding begins thousands of years ago in ancient history. In the first section, we will explore megalithic civilizations of ancient Egypt, Great Britain, and Levant. We will uncover the mysteries of the stone circles, dolmens, pyramids, temples these cultures constructed. We will look for clues that are buried beneath the surfaces at these sites. These clues will help us construct a hypothesis as to the purpose these monolithic structures served in ancient civilizations and whether there is a connection to the Federal Reserve. We will consider questions such as, is there significance to the location of these ancient various sites? Is there a spiritual component to the design and architecture of these megalithic monuments? I encourage you to make notes in the margins. You are not just along for the ride. This is about you and me together discovering what is the root system of the Federal Reserve. My hope is that by encouraging you along the way, I can propel you further than I have gone in this investigation. Buckle up. Chapter 1, Secrets of a Little Known Island. A symbol points to something unknown and mysterious and is often the precursor to a transformation. Steve Myers. The Clandestine Caper. Our investigative journey begins in a small Atlantic island off the coast of Georgia. Jekyll Island is 7 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. It is accessible by car via a causeway extending from the mainland. Many details of the escapade that took place more than a century ago have long been washed out to sea with the tide. Only a handful of facts remain. Here is what can be confirmed. On November 22nd, 1910, under the cover of night, 6 men boarded the private rail car of Senator Nelson Aldrich at the Hoboken Station in New Jersey. They were instructed to arrive separately to the station. They were to avoid curious onlookers and questions from reporters. They were to pretend as if they didn't know each other and use first names only to maintain anonymity. Secrecy was thick in the air like a heavy fog. As the train pulled away from the station, the shades were drawn for their long journey to Jekyll Island. In the early 20th century, Jekyll Island was an exclusive privately owned club for the wealthiest in America. Families such as the Morgans, Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Pultzers were just some of the elite members. In preparation for this clandestine meeting, word was sent to all of Jekyll's members that the club would be closed for 2 weeks. Even the staff were sent on to leave so temporary workers could fill their duties. Every detail was thought of to ensure seclusion and anonymity. It was absolutely vital that the meetings remained a secret. If the public discovered that the most powerful financiers in America had gathered to design the framework for a central banking cartel, it would mean utter failure for their plans. The few residents of Jekyll Island were told that these men had gathered for a duck hunt. This was partially true. They were in fact assembled to kill something, but it was not ducks. These 6 men and those they represented were the industry titans who controlled oil, railways, communication, and banking in America. In total, these 6 men were estimated to represent 1/4 of the world's wealth. Their identities have since come to light years after their furtive gathering. Number 1, Nelson Aldrich, Republican whip in the Senate, chairman of the National Monetary Commission, business associate of J.P. Morgan, father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr. Number 2, Abraham Piatt Andrew, an assistant secretary of the U.S. Treasury. Number 3, Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank of New York and most powerful of the banks at the time, representing William Rockefeller and the international investment banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Number 4, Henry Davison, senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Number 5, Benjamin Strong, head of the J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And number 6, Paul M. Warburg, a partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France, and brother to the Max Warburg, who was head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. These men were headstrong individuals with firm opinions of how a banking cartel should be structured. Tension filled the air as they hotly debated issues. Senator Aldrich was undoubtedly the one driving the agenda, and Paul Warburg was largely responsible for drafting the plan. It took 9 days for the framework of the Federal Reserve to emerge from the rendezvous. That fateful November changed the course of our nation. It set us on a path toward destruction. Now that we have been debriefed on the facts, we can set out on our investigative journey. Where the seeds of the Federal Reserve planted in the soil of Jekyll Island long before the birth of our nation? In order to address this question, we need to set our watches back thousands of years. Let's go. Archaic people, antiquated secrets. Jekyll Island has a culturally diverse history. It is marked by the footprints of numerous groups of people. Unfortunately, most traces of its earliest inhabitants have disappeared from the rising sea level. But we won't let this obstacle derail our investigation. There are significant archaeological discoveries on nearby islands that will provide traces of historical roots of Jekyll Island. So come with me, let's travel 54 miles north to Sapelo Island, another one of Georgia's coastal islands. In 1872, Sapelo Shell Ring Complex was discovered by William McKinley, who was a lawyer, plantation owner, and Georgia state legislator. He wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institute describing this shell complex. South of High Point, there are 3 mound circles. These circles are surrounded by hundreds of shell mounds, about 3 feet on basis of 20 to 50 feet, which crowd, without visible order, a field of 100 acres or more. On all these shell mounds are found fragments of Indian pottery, both plain and ornamented. Over the next several decades, the Sapelo shell rings were explored by different teams of people. In 1950, a more thorough and scientific investigation was conducted by archaeologists Louis Larson and Antonio Waring. The excavations revealed an ancient city featuring 3 neighborhoods delineated by large circular walls that were 20 feet tall and constructed from seashells. Archaeologists found that the original occupation of these rings date back between 4200 and 3000 BC, Archaic period. Some of the oldest pottery found in North America was discovered at the Sapelo Shell Ring Complex. This suggests that the indigenous people on Sapelo Island were among the first people in North America to settle in more permanent villages. These shell ring complexes raise many questions. How did the indigenous people of the Archaic period, who were thought to be hunter-gatherers, suddenly become an archaeological society with the technology to make pottery? Were there early inhabitants of Georgia's coastal islands already a civilized people group who migrated from another land? Who were these indigenous people that constructed the shell rings? One of the major debates among archaeologists is whether the shell rings were formed intentionally in an as a wall to protect the village or formed as a result of gradual accumulation of household middens, domestic waste. Victor Thompson, an archaeologist from the University of West Florida, has conducted numerous excavations of Jekyll shell complex. He concluded, regardless of how the shell rings were formed, it is evidence that remains within the deposits that the rings served as both as places of daily life and as sites for sacred ceremonies. In Thompson's research, he has discovered anomalies within the center of the largest ring, Jekyll Shell Ring 3. Using ground-penetrating radar, it's not clear yet what the archaeological deposits within the center of the ring consist of, but it does point to the usage of a particular design during Archaic period construction. These circular formations with a point in the center or a circle within a circle were common structural designs of ancient civilizations, even from the geographically diverse locations. Example, Great Britain, Egypt, and Levant. Let's investigate other ancient sites with circle formations to see if it can give us some clues as to the purpose of the shell complex and its significance in uncovering the historical roots of Jekyll Island. But first, it's important to dissect the meaning of the circle with the point in the circle. Prolific, megalithic, circumference. While the information of a circle with a point in the center and or the circle within a circle is an ancient symbol dating back thousands of years, terminology to describe these symbols has recently changed. Dan Brown, author of The Lost Symbol, coined the term Circum-Punct to identify the circle with a circle in the center point. For simplicity's sake, I will refer to both these symbols as a circumpunct. Now that we got that squared away, you may be wondering, what meaning does this symbol hold? A circumpunct has carried sacred meanings across diverse cultures across the Archaic Neolithic period. It has been an enduring symbol used in both pagan and occult rituals. Its most ancient roots are found in the Egyptian worship of the sun god, where it was employed as a solar phallic symbol used to represent the eternal nature of the sun god, Ra. According to the Egyptian hieroglyph for the sun is a circumpunct. The circumpunct is a two-dimensional phallic symbol with the dots representing the penis and the circle the womb. Egypt has a great many obelisks, towers, and pyramids covering its landscapes, all of which are symbolic expressions of sun worship. These structures represent the erect male organ pointing toward the sun, which pagans believed was the source of life. Two prominent locations that will play heavily into our investigation of the Federal Reserve are Rome and Washington, D.C., both with conspicuous obelisks within a circle or a circumpunct. The obelisk, which was erected in St. Peter's Square in 41 AD, once stood at Heliopolis, the ancient center of Egyptian sun worship. Every continent has remnants of ancient circumpuncts, which suggests that this symbol carries a universal spiritual significance. While universal in appearance, the meaning varies across cultures and religions. It's commonly understood that the megalithic civilizations used this symbol as the astronomical sign for the sign of the sun. The circle in the point represents Earth's orbital path around the sun, and it is tied to the expression of sun worship. Philosophical proponents consider the sphere of circumference to be the perfect shape that represents wholeness, unity, spirituality, and oneness. Pagans view the circle with the point as the associated with a divine collective consciousness. Manly P. Hall, a 33rd degree Freemason, described the significance of the circumpunct in one of his lectures on ancient philosophy. The keys to all the knowledge are contained in the dot, the line, and the circle. The dot is universal consciousness, the line is universal intelligence, and the circle is universal force. The threefold unknowable cause of all knowable existence. Ouroboros is an ancient Egyptian symbol depicting the serpent eating its tail, symbolizing the union of Ra and Osiris in the underworld. The symbol was adopted into Greek magical tradition and later became widely known as a symbol for alchemy. Within the realm of magic, the circle represents a sacred space, a boundary. Some magical action was necessary to transform the ordinary to the sacred, and casting a circle is a quick and effective way of doing that. In the book, The Lost Symbol, Dan Brown provides an insightful summary of the significance of a circumpunct. In the idiom of symbology, there was one symbol that reigned supreme above all others. The oldest, most universal, this symbol fused all the ancient traditions in a single, solitary image that represented the illumination of the Egyptian sun god, the triumph of alchemical gold, the wisdom of the philosopher's stone, and the purity of the Rosicrucian rose, the moment of creation, the dominance of the astrological sun, and even the omniscient, all-seeing eye that hovered atop the unfinished pyramid, the circumpunct, the symbol of source, the origin of all things. While The Lost Symbol is a fictional book, Dan Brown gives an accurate account of the sacred significance of the circumpunct. Simon Cox, the author of Decoding the Lost Symbol, the unauthorized expert guide to the facts behind the fiction, writes, Egyptian obelisks were seen by the builders as a metaphorical connection between heaven and earth, with their topmost pyramidoids symbolizing the rays of the sun as the fall to earth. The Washington Monument, the obelisk structure that holds the key to the lost word in the lost symbol, is revealed to be a circumpunct. The circular plaza surrounding the monument provides the physical setting for the symbol. The layout of the city of Washington is steeped in Freemasonry symbolism. We will discuss this more in detail later in our journey. But for now, it is important to understand that the obelisk in Washington, D.C., and the one in St. Peter's Square share something else besides the circumpunct in common. Both are strategically positioned in close proximity to a domed building. Thomas Horn writes, in Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, modern people, especially in America, may view the symbols used in this magic, the dome representing the habitual pregnant belly of Isis, and the obelisk representing the erect phallus of Osiris, as profane or pornographic, and for good reason. But they were in fact ritualized fertility objects which the ancients believed could produce tangible reactions, properties, or manifestations within the material world. The obelisk and the dome, as limitations of the deity's male and female reproductive organs, could, through government representation, invoke into existence the being or beings symbolized by them. This is why inside the temple or the dome, temple prostitutes representing the human manifestation of the goddess were also available for ritual sex as a form of imitative magic. These prostitutes usually began their services to the goddess as children, and they were deflowered at a very young age by a priest, or, as Isis was, by a modeled obelisk of Osiris phallus. Temple prostitutes were offered in coitus to divine goats. Through such imitative sex, the dome and the obelisk became energy receivers capable of assimilating Ra's essence from the rays of the sun, which in turn drew forth the seed of the underworld Osiris. The seed of the dead deity would, according to the supernaturalism, transmit upward through the portal from out of the underworld through the base testes of the obelisk and magically emit from the tower's head into the womb, the dome of Isis, where incarnation into the sitting pharaoh king president would occur during what Freemasons also call the raising of Osiris ceremony. In this way, Osiris could be habitually born again or reincarnated as Horus and constantly direct the spiritual destiny of the nation. Now that we understand the deeper meaning of the Circum-Punct, we can continue our search for these structures within ancient civilizations to see if it helps inform us on the origins of the Federal Reserve. Stone circles. Megalithic civilizations were prolific in their construction of Circum-Punct between 5000 BC and 2000 BC. One of the most well-known examples can be found in England on a stretch of land that was approximately 1,000 stone circles dotting into the countryside. The most famous of the stone circles is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is located in Salisbury Plain, and its formation dates back to sometime between 3100 BC and 2750 BC. Advanced technology has allowed archaeologists to make interesting new discoveries regarding the area surrounding Stonehenge. Ground-penetrating radar has uncovered 17 monuments that researchers think were Neolithic shrines, with several in the form of a Circum-Punct. This indicates that Stonehenge had been a sacred site long before the monolithic monument was erected. Vincent Gaffney, an archaeologist from the University of Birmingham and the project leader of the Stonehenge Hidden Monuments Project, made this statement regarding their discoveries. Stonehenge is undoubtedly a major ritual monument which people may have traveled considerable distances to come to. But it isn't just standing there by itself. It's part of a much more complex landscape with processional and ritual activities that go around it. These very different from how this had been viewed before. The important point is that Stonehenge is not alone. There was lots of other associated ritual activities going on around it. As archaeologists began putting the puzzle pieces together, they realized that other Neolithic remains in Salisbury Plains are linked to Stonehenge. The Cursus, a massive enclosure to the north of Stonehenge that runs 1.8 miles long, has two pits on either end. These recently discovered pits line up with the sunrise and the sunset of a midsummer solstice, with Stonehenge at its reference point. Additionally, a long barrow was discovered which housed a large timber building thought to have been used for ritual inhumation and defleshing of the dead. These two structures are connected with Stonehenge along a processional avenue. As mentioned earlier, the Stonehenge complex is just one of over 1,000 stone circles found in England. Other circumferences have been discovered off the coast of Norfolk. Seahenge and Holme 2 are two Neolithic circular monuments discovered within the last 20 years. Seahenge comprises 55 oak posts submerged in the ground with a large inverted gnarled oak post. Holme 2 was centered around two oak logs with the oak post circling around the center. Unfortunately, storms have washed the two circle logs and have eroded some of the other features of Holme 2. Archaeologists have determined that the dates of these two circular monuments as 2049 BC, as the timbers used in both timber circles fell at the same time, the construction of the two monuments must have been directly linked. Seahenge is thought to have been a freestanding timber circle, possibly to mark the death of an individual, acting as a cenotaph symbolizing death rather than the location for burial. If part of a burial mound, the second circle would have been the actual burial place. The appearances of over 1,000 stone/timber circles within England are quite intriguing. But even more intriguing is that these Neolithic circular monuments can be found in Egypt, France, Ireland, Malta, Morocco, Portugal, Scotland, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey. This begs the question, what was the purpose of these circular monuments? One theory is that they represented burial sites or sites for death rituals. Another theory is that they have astronomical purpose. It's possible they were used for both. Alexander Thom, a professor of engineering at Oxford University, surveyed 300 of Great Britain's megalithic circles. He found a unit of measurement that he termed the megalithic yard. He published his findings in 1955 after discovering that this unit of measurement was utilizing in construction all the stone circles he surveyed. Additionally, Thom discovered that many of them were oriented to the sun and the moon. Thom concluded that these stone circles were observatories, places to view the stars from. He believes the stone circles served as astronomical calendars. Over half a century later, researchers have explained on Thom's theories by looking at the way the standing stones are aligned in relation to the sun, moon, and stars. Gail Higginbottom and her team from the University of Adelaide, Australia, studied more than 100 of Scotland's stone circles. They published their findings in the Journal of Archaeological Science reports in August of 2016. By 3000 BC, in the late Neolithic, there had been a significant change in the way many people materialized their cosmology across Scotland, with the introduction of freestanding stones that continued to be erected almost until the end of the Bronze Age. Significantly, a series of astronomical patterns have been empirically verified for many Bronze Age monuments that were erected in the later Bronze Age. Through innovative statistics and software, we show that visible astronomical landscape variables found at the Bronze Age sites on the inner isles of the mainland of Western Scotland determine the dates of these two circular monuments as 2049 BC. David Robertson, Historic Environment Officer for Norfolk County Council and Home 2 Project manager, stated, as the timbers used in both timber circles were felled at the same time, the construction of the two monuments must have been directly linked. Seahenge is thought to have been a freestanding timber circle, possibly to mark the death of an individual, acting as a central path symbolizing death rather than the location of that. This suggests that in some continuity of the cosmological system through time, despite the various radical material and social change that occurred from the Neolithic and late Bronze Age. The oldest reliably dated stone circle in Scotland are Stennis and Callanish, and were the basis of the astronomical patterns that Higginbottom found. This pattern was replicated over the next 2,000 years among the other stone circles. Side note, I live in New Orleans, next to Stennis Space Center. That's interesting. This pattern was replicated over 2,000 years among the other stone circles erected across Scotland. Higginbottom proposed the Neolithic people must have understood the specific cycles of the moon and the sun. Not everyone shares Higginbottom's perspective. Kenneth Brophy of the University of Glasgow, Scotland, has proposed a much different purpose behind these megalithic monuments. He critiques the application of modern mathematical techniques to prehistorical people and argues that there are no instances where prehistoric people demonstrate a highly mathematical view of the world. Instead, he suggests that these megalithic stone circles were built with the attention to the land itself rather than the celestial world. Research has shown that these stone circles were built in such a way that you can view one stone circle while standing amidst another. A ley line, so to speak. Brophy suggests that the circles represent power and ritual. He believes that the specific location for each monument was chosen because of previous events that took place on the land. In other words, the land represented something sacred to the Neolithic architects and builders. The archaeological evidence demonstrates that these monuments provided a place for social rituals, especially those rituals performed to honor the dead. Gordon Noble of the University of Aberdeen has collected with Kenneth Brophy in several archaeological projects, focusing on stone and timber circles within Scotland. He suggests that the design for many of the stone circles in Scotland are similar to the structures people built for their everyday living at that time. However, instead of these stone and timber circles serving the living, they serve the dead. In other words, they're essentially very large houses for the dead and spirits. Uncovering ancient paths. Brophy speaks about stone circles being created in relation to a ley line. But what exactly are ley lines? Where megalithic monuments aligned with intentionality? To answer these questions, it's important we understand ancient paths. Alistair Petrie, in his book Releasing Heaven on Earth, describes ancient pathways as follows. Ancient pathways were really the first migration routes and points of entry into any given geographical area. Even at those early moments in human history, the influence of stewardship was at work, defined by those of who people were and what their religious worldview involved, and what covenants and pacts they had established among themselves and with the gods they worshipped. In discovering the ramifications of the early influence and the subsequent generations of stewardship, we learn what still may be affecting us today. Along ancient pathways, it was common for people to set up monuments to mark sacred spaces. Alfred Watkins, an amateur archaeologist, photographer, and historian, coined the term ley lines in his thesis proposed in 1921. Ley lines, as he described them, are alignments of ancient burial mounds, monuments, barrows, ditches, and castles, ponds, and trackways. Watkins observed that the alignment of these sites was unmistakably intentional. He stated, "Imagine a fairy chain stretched from mountain peak to mountain peak as far as the eye could reach and laid out while it touched the high places of the earth at a number of ridges, banks, and knolls. Then visualize a monument or a mount, a circular earthwork or a clump of trees planted on these high points and in low points in the valley were mounds ringed round with water to be seen from a distance. Then great standing stones brought to mark the way at intervals, and on a bank leading up to a mountain ridge or down to a ford, the track cut deep so as to form a guiding notch on the skyline. As you come up a mountain pass, the road cut deeply to show a notch far off. Here and there, in two ends of the way, a beacon fire used to lay out the track, with ponds dug on the line or streams banked up into flashes to form reflecting points on the beacon track so that it might be checked when at least once a year the beacon was fired on the traditional day. All these work exactly on the ley line. If these megalithic monuments were intentionally aligned along a ley line, it raises the question of how the location of each ley line was determined. Brophy intimated that the location of a ley line was determined by monuments marking significant events that occurred on the land. Watkins spoke about high places dotting the landscape in such a way that they are connected to form a ley line. Unfortunately, British archaeologists are only able to speculate about what significant events might have occurred on the land because there is no written record of the ancient events. Fortunately, we can learn a lot from the biblical record of the ancient Near East during the Bronze Age, 3300 BC to 1200 BC. The book of Leviticus dates back to approximately 1446 BC, when the Israelites were in the wilderness following their exodus from Egypt. We find that the first biblical mention of high places in Leviticus 26:30, "And I will destroy your high places and cut down your images and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you." In Hebrew, the word for high places is Bama, which means high place, ridge, height, funeral mound. This sounds strikingly similar to Watkins' definition of high places that connect to form ley lines. Further understanding the word Bama comes from the Genesis Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, which suggests that the ancient Hebrew, when they fell into idolatry, like many other nations, regarded sacred rites performed on mountains and hills as most acceptable to gods, and they erected their sanctuaries or chapels. When we see that high places were sacred sites where monuments, mounds, sanctuaries, and other markers were established on elevated land that were visible from a distance, there are 91 instances throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, where the word term high place is referred to, which adds support to the theory that the megalithic monuments were built as a place of worship. The visibility of a high place served multiple purposes. It was a physical declaration that the land itself was dedicated to a certain deity. It also made the pilgrimage to a location easier because the worshippers could set their sights on the high place from quite a distance away. Depending on how far worshippers traveled, it is conceivable that they would have erected other monuments along their journeys as sacred stations of worship. Ezekiel 6 lends some credence to this theory. Ezekiel 6:3, and say, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains and to the hills, to the rivers and to the valleys, behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. In Ezekiel's day, 590 BC, high places were erected on mountain, hills, rivers, and valleys. This is consistent with Alfred Watkins' experience of the ancient pathways in Hereford, England. Ancient peoples of the Near East and of the British Isles are similar sacred practices established in high places of worship. When these high places or power points are aligned and form a ley line, it intensifies the spiritual power in a region. Ley lines are established from occult practices or pagan forms of worship. George Otis Jr. has defined ley lines as geographic continuums of spiritualized power that are established or at least recognized by the early inhabitants of an era or an area. Over the course of time, these ley lines are reinforced by ongoing worship at high places, ritualistic bloodshed, and additional power points established along its path. Another way to think about a ley line is its spiritual pathway established by a geographically aligned power points. Several ley lines can be connected with each other, forming a spiritual grid over a territory or region. Inhabitants living amid or amongst these grids or grid can come under spiritual forces of darkness or light that operate within the spiritual grid. People may be completely unaware of the existence of such ley lines or spiritual grids, but still experience the ill effects. You might be asking yourself, how does this relate to Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve? The connection will become very clear if you look at the dollar bill. The Circum-Punct, also known as the all-seeing eye, within the pyramidoon, is heavy, laden with symbolism. We will unpack in greater detail the meaning of the symbols found on the Federal Reserve note toward the end of the investigation. Let me just say, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Circum-Punct is displayed on the dollar bill. We are going to take brief pause on our journey back in time to travel to Torino, Italy. This jaunt is necessary in laying the foundation for understanding the importance of ley lines and how power grids transcend time. The key points to what I just said were the Circum-Punct found in Sapello shell rings 54 miles north of Jekyll Island. Number 2, the Circum-Punct is a prominent symbol in ancient civilizations. Number 3, ancient monuments often found in alignment with other sacred sites form ley lines. Number 4, ley lines are connected to form a spiritual power grid over a territory.